You're watching Beyond Market. Welcome, I'm Esther Awoni. Many thanks for joining us today. On today's show, we'll discuss Nigeria's meter asset provider regulation and find out the opportunities and challenges the regulation provides. Remember, you can join today's conversation also with the hashtag Beyond Market. You can also send your thoughts, your comments to my Twitter handle too. It's at Esther O. Awoni. Now, the race to close Nigeria's 5 million metering gap took a turn for the better after the meter asset provider regulation took effect in April last year. Now, since then, about 108 firms began operations nationwide 5 months ago after getting a nod from the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission. However, what has been the experience so far? Dallas Peavy, Group Chief Operating Officer at Armese Power Solutions, joins me for today's discussion. Thank you, Dr. Dallas, for joining us today. But let's start with, just looking at the metering, the whole scheme, it would appear that there's so many moving parts. But let's start from the beginning where we know that we need 5 million meters to be provided. But bring us up to speed, because what we're hearing now, the latest news, the latest headlines we see is that there's been an increase in duty for those who import the meters, a 35% increase. Help us understand how that is playing out.
Well, it's made it very difficult, in fact. You know, when you mention the number 5 million, that's 5 million customers that are either getting estimated billing or not paying anything at all. So that affects the DISCO and it affects the whole value chain, because how do you pay for the service of electricity when you don't have the income to come in? That 35% tariff or levy that's been placed on the meters, it came even after the MAPs was implemented and the pricing were given to the DISCOs for their customers. So when you add on top of the current low price for those meters, most of which are imported, that 35% makes it where you can't afford. How can a customer afford a 53,000 single-phase meter or 73,000 cost for a three-phase meter? It makes it very difficult.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because, following the happenings within the power sector, one thing I've noticed is that at every point in time, it's been very clear and very also important for multi-stakeholder engagement, regular stakeholder engagement. I know that I think it was the former Minister of Power who held regular town hall meetings to just get everybody, to ensure that everybody was on the same page, because there's so many, as you know, so many challenges within the sector. So it's quite interesting and a little surprising to see this tariff, because many of the players say, look, we didn't see this coming. Those who import, we didn't see this tariff coming. We've had certain terms and conditions with our lenders, our manufacturers, based on the 10% initial tariff. Now we're going up 35%, and that just throws everything off balance. So I'm just wondering, from the stakeholder engagement point of view, what has gone wrong? Well,
it's a big concern for us as a provider, simply because it was never planned, it was never discussed. It was just something that the regulatory agency came out and said from the Minister of Finance, this is going to be applied after the fact. So as you said, I mean, meeting with our bankers and our financiers, as well as the DISCOs themselves, what they've said is, that's your problem. You need to address that with NERC and through the Ministry of Finance. So, but how do we go back now and tell our customer, oh, by the way, we need to charge you an additional 35% tariff to the DISCOs for the price per meter? It just throws it completely out of whack that you can't control the pricing and give the customers what they deserve at a reasonable price.
That is another conversation itself, the issue of pricing versus allowing market forces to prevail.
Absolutely.
So I'm just wondering, how did we get there? And I know the players, you probably kicked against it, I suppose, but I'm just wondering the effect of having a fixed price versus allowing market forces to prevail.
It follows along that same line. When you have the different areas or different market segments that you should be able to go to and have the market drive the cost of pricing for those meters and the services from each DISCO, the price is set. So how do you go to Kano and say, this is the price that it should be for you, whether that's more or less, and then you come to Echo in this area that's much more affluent, you have a better income stream for most folks, and so the price could be more that would offset their customer base. It makes it very difficult. So how do either the DISCO, the customer, or the meter providers, how do you make ends meet when you have that kind of levy and the market forces are working against you?
Now, while we have those who import, we also have the local manufacturer who assemble, who just buy the raw materials, I suppose, and just assemble it here. Now, it's interesting because on one hand, some of the local manufacturers say, look, we can meet local demand. And those who import say no, the local guys cannot meet local demand. That's why we're here, to complement. So I'm just wondering, for those who locally manufacture, can we meet local demand? Can the local manufacturers meet domestic demand?
Well, the answer is absolutely yes. You know that Armese has a metering factory in Ibun State. It can do 3 million meters per year of single-phase meters, and so we certainly have the capabilities. What we're currently doing is we import the meters, we manufacture the boxes, we assemble those for testing, and then that's how we provide for the meters. What we could do is because we provided that at our facility, to double that expansion if needed, but we haven't had that request yet. What we've had is on piece by piece by piece basis. Again, we've done 350 meters in the last year. So that leaves 2.7 million that we could have produced to meet the local market demand.
So for Armese, for you just have to import more components?
Right now that's exactly the way it would work. We would import the components and then manufacture the boxes, do the assembly, and sell it. With this new tariff, one of the things or levy that we'd have to do is go back and look at doing all of the components and then assembling those together and then manufacture the box, put it in, because that levy is about 5% versus the 35%. So can we do it locally? Absolutely. Can the locals provide for the country? Absolutely. The problem here is that we're the only factory that has those capabilities. Having said that, I just said that we could do 3 million a year. We could up that to meet the demand.
Well, it's funny because I'm just wondering what's going to happen to those guys, because what we're also hearing is that many of them have yet to clear those meters at the ports because obviously they weren't expecting the 35% hike. What does that mean for the distribution process?
Well, it backs them up because they have commitments and mandates by NERC to do this on a certain time frame and schedule. What they've done is several of those meter providers or their maps providers can't even claim, they've abandoned their shipments at the port simply because they can't afford them. So what happens to the distribution companies? Now they scramble to find another meter provider, which is where we've had to do is come back and step in to fill some of those gaps. It works for us, but at the same time, to meet all the demand has been a challenge.
But do you expect some petitions to be put forward to NERC in terms of those?
From our standpoint, we've already done that. From a Armese standpoint, we've written twice to NERC and asked for a hearing for reconsideration on that. NERC has come back in an unofficial manner and said that they've gone back to the Ministry of Finance to have a look at that, but there's nothing been promised.
I'm just wondering, because, for the maps, the discos, the GENCOs, how is it affecting the value chain? It
affects the entire value chain. As you said, from the GENCOs to be able to sell their power and transmit it through TCN into the distribution. For those distribution companies then to be able to go out, provide those power to those feeder areas, and then collect the money, because it's going to be soon illegal for estimated billing for those areas. So you must have a meter for every customer. But even as we had referenced before, with 14 million as the population, just in Port Harcourt alone, they have an estimated 1 million customers. Of those, only 350,000 are metered. What does that mean? That means that you have another 650 customers out there that are consuming electricity that isn't getting paid for. How do you then, as a DISCO, remit those payments back to NBET, to NERC and the federal agencies, and then how does the GENCOs get paid? So it affects the whole value chain.
Now, in terms of, because we have to meet 5 million, that's the figure.
That's the minimum figure.
The minimum. Okay.
Minimum figure.
But do we know? Are we tracking? Are we monitoring how many have gone out so far? Do we know how many more Nigerians or what's left to be provided in the market?
Well, from the 3 map areas that we're providing for, Echo, Port Harcourt, and Kano, we know that we're only doing about 35% of the total needs currently.
But will we be able to meet? Is there a deadline in terms of, okay, by this certain date or year, we should have metered X number of people?
There is a deadline. This process started 5 months ago. But because of the slow kickoff and then now because of the levies, that has slowed the process down even more. We're supposed to have this completed before the end of next year, but it looks like it's not going to happen simply because the meter providers that stepped in for those map areas have said we can't afford those levies because we can't make any money on it. We can't even break even on it. From our side, because we're a manufacturer, we've been able to offset that by doing it ourselves, but it makes it very difficult then because you have so many other map providers coming to us saying, listen, we need to buy these meters, but here's the price we can afford to pay. It doesn't do us any good.
So, you turned that down?
No, well, we're still working to work on that,
working.
but because the price of meters is already set, how do you go back and change that?
So, because on the consumer side, what we hear many times is, they talk about the standards of the meter, the type of meter, how fast or how slow, and some have even gone as far as saying that they prefer the old metering system. I suppose that's another conversation. But in terms of standards, the kind of meters that are coming in, what can you tell us?
Oh, from our standpoint, what I've seen in all the map area providers is we're working off of international standards. It's not Chinese standards, it's not U.S. standards, it's international standards. Even Armese has acquired the qualifications and the certifications so that we can sell these meters in the U.S. We can install these same type of meters in the U.S. While it's a different voltage and different level of current, it still can be utilized based upon the settings.
So from a standardization point of view,
it's international standards.
We're okay in
That's
that
correct.
point. Now, back to what we were talking before, when for the guys who are not able to clear their meters at the ports, and of course, should we expect estimated billing to extend longer than we planned?
We certainly hope not. We certainly hope not. We're hoping that working with NERC and the Ministry of Finance, we can roll back this levy to something that's reasonable so that we can take those shipments, even ourselves, take those shipments and fulfill the MAP obligation.
Now, I know that Armese also provides meters in Liberia.
Yes.
Could you just tell us about that market, how it's been providing meters there, and maybe just make some comparisons with the Nigerian market?
Well, we got an agreement with the country of Liberia almost a year ago to provide a certain number of meters. What I would say is that the needs for meter is almost different from what it is here in Nigeria, simply because the number of meters that they have there almost non-existent. The system, while we talk about the problems and the issues in Nigeria, Liberia is not caught up to the fact of where Nigeria is in their power implementation process. So the meters that we're providing there, it's a simpler process simply because nobody really has them. It's a matter of going out through the system, designing the system to make sure that the meters are implemented and integrated into the system of their distribution.
Okay, but just looking at the whole power privatization, power sector here in Nigeria, looking across the value chain, if it's not gas issues, if the discos, it's liquidity, it's interestingly, sometimes power actually being rejected because it cannot be evacuated, and we're still hovering between 4,000. But what are your thoughts, your perspective on how we have progressed so far on this power privatization journey, and those challenges, how we're addressing our challenges, and those, if there are bright spots that we can hold on to and say, okay, we can point to these that show that we're making progress?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. I've been there for a number of years. We've come a long way from where we were, even though the number of megawatts hasn't changed as far as their peak periods on a daily basis. Having said that, what the government has done a very good job of has come back to look at the mini grids, microgrids, and those kind of things, so that in specific areas they can provide that isolated powers within those regions. What that does is it relieves the grid of that burden of trying to, as you said, get it from one area of generation down to Port Harcourt or other areas where they can't get it into the feeder systems that they need to be able to sell the power to metered customers.
Dallas, we just pause at this point. Thank you for your time so far. We'll come back and pick up from where we left off. I've been speaking to Dr. Dallas Peavy. He's a Group Chief Operating Officer at Armese Power Solutions. If you're just joining us, Dr. Dallas Peavy, the Group Chief Operating Officer at Armese Power Solutions, is with me today, and we're discussing the impact of the Meter Asset Provider Scheme in Nigeria and also looking at other issues within Nigeria's power sector. Dallas, thank you for your time so far.
Thank you.
Let's pick up from where we left off. We're talking about microgrids and talking about the power sector in general. Now, there are a number of other initiatives that the government has done, like you said, just removing pressure on the main grid itself, like the rural electrification scheme, where we're seeing the government providing power to tertiary institutions and rural areas.
Correct.
Just to get that extra pressure of the grid. What can you tell us in terms of how that is gaining traction and if it's actually making a difference?
I think it is making a difference, and it certainly is getting traction, because at the larger universities in different remote areas, the government has taken a step to improve the system within those areas. And what I mean by that is even Ibun Power, they can't get all their power to the grid, but they're looking at providing 100 megawatts into remote areas like Calabar and places like that, so that the power is now directly to those systems But now to do that, you have to upgrade the transmission system, the distribution system, and the metering. But what that does is, as you said, it relieves the pressure on the grid itself and on the power generation companies, because now they can sell that power specifically to the discos or to certain areas and get paid for that money. Based upon that, they can pay their bills, upgrade their systems, and continue to do the maintenance. On the other side of it, it doesn't then put the pressure on TCN to take the power where they have antiquated systems still, and they can put it into the major areas, then the distribution systems can take that power to where they need it and provide the power for the people. So it's come a long way in the last 5 years.
I know one key component of that's quite crucial is investments, more investments to come in. We've seen public-private partnerships, PPP projects. We had one. I think that was the one in Edo State that we continue to talk about, but we haven't had much more of that. I'm just wondering, how can we get more of that?
I think one of the things that the government has to do is be reasonable and sustain their instructions by what they want. By what I mean by that is, even the NERC order that came out last week with the distribution companies, they were threatening to take their license. All those bankers, all those investors, all those outside foreign investors, now they're all nervous. I think you have to have a system whereby you give the opportunity of both the DISCOs, the GENCOs, TCN, and the government an opportunity to make this work. Remember, this industry is only a little over 5 years old. You don't go from where it was to where we need it to be within 5 years, 6 years. Even the president, when he came in his first term, said we'll need 7 to 10 years to make this thing work and turn it around. I think we've come a long way.
But sometimes perception matters, because for investors who are looking on the outside and looking at the Nigerian power market and saying, wow, this is fertile ground, we can come here, it's still in a nascent stage, we can come here and really do something. But when they get the feeling or the perception that there might be regular regulation changes, maybe lack of sanctity of contract, etc. It makes obviously investors nervous, and of course money is not going to go to a place where there are question marks. Would you say the Nigerian power sector has that perception? Do investors see the market that way?
I think from an outside investor's perspective, that's exactly what they see. They see uncertainty. And uncertainty for an investor means that you're nervous, you're not going to invest in anything, that there's a chance that things can be rolled back on you. I've seen it in the discos, coming from the generation side. I've seen it from the generation companies. It's hard to get outside investors, or even the current set of investors, to invest more when you can't recoup that original investment. I think the government needs to continue to put the programs forward. I think they need to work with outside agencies like Power Africa to meet some of the smaller needs in the different areas. That will help take the burden off the government so much on the grid power.
But at some point, we would need those investments to come in.
Oh,
because
absolutely.
those are the kind of investments that move the needle, that make a difference.
Without that, you're not going to get through that 7 to 10 year period to get where you really and truly need to be. That requires investment both in the generation sector as well as the distribution sector and the transmission sector, because to get power from point A, point B to point C to the customer, and the customer pay for that, it requires a lot of investment. And so far, we haven't seen that.
I know this might be a bit of a difficult question for you, but in the conversations that players in the sector have with the regulator, are these the kind of issues that come up in terms of, look, we're all in this to be successful from the top of the chain to the bottom of the chain, but we need more investments to come into this sector. Obviously, you're also an investor anyway, yes. So in the system. But just to make things easier for you, obviously, if there's more liquidity in the system, the better things. I'm just wondering, do those kind of conversations come up in terms of, can we have stable regulation? Can we have regulations that are not rolled back? Can we have better, perception?
Well, I think that this very discussion, this very topic is almost an everyday topic between all of the investors in the distribution, the generation, even with NERC on a regular basis, because we're all investors. Even the government has invested heavily, as you know, their ownership from the DISCO and the generation side, so they're still a heavy investor with BP managing that. Having said that, I think for us, we need to have a consistent level playing field among all the parties so that we can recoup our investment. We all invested to make money. But let me just go back and say this, from the initial beginning at both the distribution and the generation levels, the original investors didn't do that just to go out and make money. They did it because they wanted to improve Nigeria, because most of those players all did something else. Oil and gas, banking, just something else. What they said is, to get Nigeria to move where it needs to be, that development and that growth, it requires power. To do the power and the things that we need to do, it requires heavy investment. To date, has that paid off? Not a bit. It's not even close. We need more investment, but to do that, there's things that the government has to help us do to get where we need to be.
So, but what would be what continues to keep investors, in this sector within? I mean, is it because when you look back, you look at the magnitude of investments that have already been made, and you're like, okay, it's not worth it to leave now. Let's just ride this thing out.
I think it's a little bit of that, or a lot of that, I should say, that we've invested so heavily that you can't just walk away. The other is that we see the premise working with the government because we see the vision of where we need to be. We know that we can get there, but we know it's going to take some time. It's just with these constant fluctuations and regulations and changes in the laws that we say, okay, this is not what we started with. This was what the market was expected to be. This was the tariff. This was the MITO. As you and I have had this numerous conversations.
Order, okay.
Yes, absolutely. So we need to be consistent with our programs so that the investors can have a comfort feeling that it's not just a 5-year payback or it's not just a quick return. We're in it for the long haul. But to do that, we have to have consistency. We agreed to this. Let's see it through to that point.
But obviously, I mean, speaking about consistency, going forward, how difficult is it for you to plan? Because we're in a government that's in its second term, and of course, the way the political cycles play out in Nigeria, there's a possibility that we may have another party, another type of government, and who knows what's going to happen. But obviously, we're all hoping that the overriding, desire to have power will prevail. But does that make you nervous?
Well, based upon what's happened in the past, it does make, as an investor and a company owner, very nervous because you don't know which way the ball is going to roll. For the last 5+ years, we've fought back and forth with, are they going to try to take the businesses back? Are we going to be able to complete what we started? And as you said, we don't know if the administration changes in the next 3.5 years, 3 years, what will happen or what will come in and what the winds will bring with it. But we're counting on the government being consistent because the need is the same. The people they need the power.
Now, you play in other markets too. Just want back to our conversation on comparison, looking at the Nigerian market, the peculiarities of the Nigerian market versus other markets, or perhaps if there been any similar market to that of Nigeria with similar power problems in which they have been able to, one way or the other, surmount and come out on the other side.
Well, even the U.S., when they started their deregulatory actions to take the market out of the hands of a few and put it among the private entity, it wasn't successful off the bat. India, Nigeria is often compared to the Indian market. What I would say the difference here is that because the market here, the money driven here is oil-based, where you look at the U.S., they're much more balanced. India is not. They don't have those natural resources. But the need is that the power need is here. I mean, you have 200 million people in Nigeria. You're the largest market in Africa. You're one of the largest growing markets in the world. I think that the need is there. The investors see the need is there. We just need to forget about comparing ourselves to somebody else. We've set the pattern. The government has set that pattern. We need to follow it through to the end.
Okay. And I know that, back to power types, I know that we're also using alternative renewable energy power to help us to move faster, solar, hydro, and et cetera. What kind of investments are you seeing coming in? Are we having enough investment coming in, especially in solar? I mean, we have a lot of sunlight here.
I think we're not seeing enough investment in the renewable markets. I think that the opportunities in Nigeria are much more than just the solar. I think wind, there's very small geothermal, but there's other resources that could help alleviate the gas issues that you talked about, the attacks and those kind of things. I think that the government needs to step up its actions and its directives toward the renewable side. I've seen over the last 2 years they pushed harder on the renewable sides, i.e., as we talked about earlier, providing what I would call mini grids with the solar power at the universities and hospitals and those areas. That's a perfect step forward. We just need to move to a more utility scale renewables so that we relieve the burden from the gas sector.
Okay. We have about 2 minutes left. Let's quickly talk about the consumer. Okay. The Nigerian power consumer can be quite tricky. For years, they've been used to the estimated billing, and many times, been able to just bypass one way or the other. And of course, when it comes to the issue of tariff, it's been a battle between the consumer, the government, and the Labour Congress, always fighting to keep those tariffs as low as possible. And many power players that I've spoken to have said nothing significant is going to happen in this sector until we have cost-reflective tariffs, which I think the government is beginning to probably realize now. But how has it been, dealing with consumer and having that change of mindset that needs to happen for consumers.
Well, I certainly
to get the
agree with
best
what
of
you
it.
said. It's even more than just, the mentality that we can bypass and we should get this. There's a sense of, in certain areas, of entitlement because the government either subsidized in a matter of ways, or the people, as you said, just got the power for free. I think by going through the last 2 or 3 years and moving forward over the next 18 months to 2 years, you'll see a drastic change. I think the majority of people in Nigeria are willing to pay for the power if they can get sustainable, available power, and it can be proven to them they will pay for what they receive. Estimated billing has no place in the marketplace. As you go to a gas station, you don't want to go there and say, okay, give me this much, $5,000 worth of gas, but you don't know how much gas you're truly getting in your tank. You want to get what you pay for. That's justified.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for talking to us today. Pleasure having you on the show. I've been speaking with Dr. Dallas Peavy. He's a Group Chief Operating Officer at Armese Power Solutions. We've been talking about, of course, the meter asset provider scheme, regulation, and, of course, other issues within Nigeria's power space. So that's it on Beyond Markets. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Remember, you can watch the show at 5 p.m. West African time daily and have access to all previous episodes of the show on our website. That's cnbcafrica.com. You can also stay engaged with the hashtag Beyond Markets, and you can follow my Twitter handle too. It's at Esther O. Awoni. For myself and the team, it's bye for now.